The morning sky above New York City tore open like someone had ripped a hole in reality itself. The breach was massive, stretching from Manhattan to Brooklyn, and through it came ships that looked like they were made of living crystal. They moved without sound, floating down through the atmosphere like deadly jellyfish made of glass and metal. Dr. Sarah was drinking her morning coffee in the underground laboratory of the Centers for Disease Control when the emergency broadcasts began. She watched the news feed on her computer screen, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The ships were beautiful in a terrifying way, their surfaces shifting colors from deep purple to electric blue as they descended over every major city on Earth. The first alien soldiers emerged from the ships within minutes of their arrival. They looked nothing like the green humanoids from old science fiction movies. These beings were tall and angular, their bodies covered in what looked like natural armor made of the same crystalline material as their ships. They moved with fluid grace, their four arms ending in hands that could shift from fingers to claws to tools as needed. General watched the invasion unfold from the Pentagon's Emergency Command Center. His first instinct was to order airstrikes, but the F-22 Raptors that engaged the alien ships might as well have been throwing paper airplanes. The fighters' missiles exploded harmlessly against energy shields, while return fire from the crystalline vessels turned the jets into clouds of superheated metal. On the ground, it was even worse. The alien soldiers carried weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. Some fired beams of energy that could melt through tank armor like it was butter. Others produced sonic waves that shattered concrete buildings and left human soldiers unconscious or dead from internal bleeding. Within 6 hours of the first ship's appearance, every major military installation on Earth had either fallen or gone silent. Sarah watched the footage of Chicago burning and felt her scientific mind trying to process what seemed impossible. The aliens moved through human territory like they owned it, but she noticed something odd about their behavior. In the news reports, she could see that the invaders seemed to avoid certain areas entirely. They stayed away from hospitals, sewage treatment plants, and landfills. At first, she thought it might be because these places had no strategic value, but something about the pattern bothered her. The aliens called themselves the hegemony, though humans only learned this from intercepted communications. Their language sounded like music played through broken glass, all sharp notes and harmonic frequencies that hurt human ears. Military intelligence managed to piece together fragments of their transmissions, revealing that Earth was just the 18th dimension they had conquered. Colonel James Park led the defense of Seoul until his position became impossible to hold. The soldiers seemed to know exactly where human forces would be before they arrived. Their technology was so advanced that human weapons couldn't even scratch their armor. But Park noticed the same thing Sarah had seen on the news. The aliens avoided the older parts of the city where the sewers were ancient, and the smell of decay was strongest. Sarah spent the first day of the invasion in her laboratory, comparing invasion routes with city maps and environmental data. She pulled up satellite images showing bacterial concentration levels in different urban areas, data that had been collected for public health purposes. The correlation was impossible to ignore. The aliens consistently avoided places where Earth's bacterial load was highest. In London, Dr. Wright was trapped in her microbiology lab at Imperial College when the aliens took the city. She watched from her window as crystalline soldiers marched through the streets, their movements perfectly coordinated. But when a group of them approached a construction site where a broken sewer line had been flooding the area with waste water, they stopped. They actually backed away from the contaminated zone and found another route. The command ship hung in orbit above Earth like a massive cathedral made of living crystal. Inside, Commander reviewed the conquest reports with satisfaction. This dimension's dominant species was carbon-based and primitive, just as their scouts had predicted. The humans relied on crude kinetic weapons and chemical explosives that were useless against bioarmor. Their technology was thousands of years behind the hegemony's most basic systems. But something was troubling the lower-ranked officers. Several platoons had reported feeling unwell after extended ground operations. The symptoms were unlike anything in medical databases: weakness, disorientation, and strange discoloration of their crystalline armor. The medical staff dismissed these complaints as stress reactions from prolonged dimensional travel. Sarah finally got through to General on the third day of the invasion. Most of the command structure was in chaos, but the General was still coordinating resistance from the Pentagon's deep bunkers. Sarah explained her theory over a scratchy satellite phone connection, while explosions echoed in the background. "General, I think they're vulnerable to our bacteria," she said, trying to keep her voice steady as another building collapsed somewhere above ground. "Every pattern analysis shows they avoid areas with high concentrations of organic decay. I think their immune systems can't handle Earth's microorganisms." Was quiet for a long moment. Around him, staff officers coordinated the evacuation of Washington, D.C., while alien ships methodically destroyed every government building above ground. "Doctor, are you telling me these things that can vaporize tanks are afraid of germs?" "Not afraid," Sarah corrected. "I think they're physically incompatible with our bacterial ecosystem. Look, they evolved on crystalline worlds in other dimensions. Their biology is probably silicon-based, maybe silicon-carbon hybrid. They've never encountered the kind of chaotic biological soup that Earth represents." As if to prove her point, reports began coming in from field units that alien soldiers in heavily contaminated areas were showing signs of distress. A Marine unit hiding in the New York subway system reported seeing troops stumbling and falling near areas where sewage had backed up into the tunnels. Dr. Wright in London made the same observation. From her lab window, she watched a patrol of alien soldiers investigate a bombed-out hospital. When they entered the morgue area where bodies had been decomposing for days, their movements became erratic. One of them actually collapsed, its crystalline armor developing strange cracks that leaked an unknown fluid. They had conquered 17 dimensions using the same strategy: overwhelming technological superiority followed by systematic elimination of resistance. Their bioarmor was immune to radiation, kinetic weapons, explosives, and energy attacks. Their ships could withstand anything from nuclear weapons to solar flares. They had never encountered a world where the very air was filled with microscopic predators that had been evolving for billions of years. Sarah worked through the night, analyzing samples of alien biomatter that had been recovered from the battlefield. What she found confirmed her worst fears and her greatest hope. The physiology was a marvel of biological engineering, but it was completely sterile. Their immune systems were designed to handle crystalline pathogens and energy-based diseases, not the aggressive, adaptive bacteria and viruses that thrived on Earth. By dawn of the fourth day, the alien occupation was complete. Every major city had fallen, every military installation was destroyed or abandoned, and human resistance had been reduced to scattered groups hiding in sewers and underground bunkers. But in her CDC laboratory, Dr. Sarah was preparing humanity's counterattack with nothing more than petri dishes and bacterial cultures that had been humanity's companions since the beginning of time. The thought they had won. They had no idea that Earth's deadliest weapons were invisible everywhere and had already begun their work. Sarah stood in what remained of the CDC's underground laboratory, surrounded by equipment she had never imagined using as weapons of war. Above ground, they continued their systematic occupation of Earth, but down in the depths where bacteria thrived in the darkness, humanity was about to strike back. The plan was desperate and brilliant in its simplicity. If the aliens couldn't handle Earth's microorganisms, then Earth would give them more microorganisms than they could possibly imagine. Sarah had spent the past 18 hours working with the few remaining military scientists to weaponize every pathogen they could get their hands on. General coordinated the operation from a bunker in Colorado, one of the last military installations still in human hands. The remaining Air Force pilots were farmers and crop dusters, their military aircraft long since destroyed. But crop dusters could carry biological agents, and that was all they needed. The first test came in downtown Chicago, where a garrison had set up operations in the former tower. A single modified crop duster flew over the area at dawn, releasing a cloud of concentrated bacterial culture that Sarah had prepared from hospital waste and sewage treatment samples. The pilot, a former Navy aviator named Captain Lisa Torres, watched through her rear camera as the invisible cloud settled over the alien position. The effect was not immediate, but it was unmistakable. Within an hour, the soldiers below began moving differently. Their usual precise coordination became sluggish and erratic. By afternoon, several of them had collapsed entirely, their crystalline armor developing the same strange cracks and leaks that field reports had described. Dr. Wright in London was conducting her own experiments from the basement of Imperial College. She had managed to capture a wounded soldier and expose it to controlled doses of common Earth bacteria. The results were horrifying and encouraging in equal measure. Streptococcus, which caused nothing worse than strep throat in humans, ate through the alien's bioarmor like acid. E-bacteria reproduced so rapidly in the alien system that they formed visible colonies on its surface within hours. The most effective weapon turned out to be the simplest: human sewage. The complex ecosystem of bacteria that lived in human waste was so alien to physiology that exposure to even small amounts caused immediate system failure. Sarah coordinated with resistance cells to weaponize every sewage treatment plant still under human control. In Lowe's Angels, a group of survivors led by former Marine Sergeant David had been hiding in the subway tunnels since the invasion began. When they received Sarah's instructions through underground radio networks, they began systematically flooding the tunnels above with sewage from broken water treatment pipes. The patrols that had been hunting them through the underground were forced to retreat as their soldiers began falling ill. The aliens tried to adapt. Medical teams worked frantically to develop treatments for what they termed biological contamination syndrome. But Earth's microorganisms had been evolving for billions of years, constantly adapting to new environments and developing resistance to natural antibiotics. Every time the aliens thought they had found a solution, new strains of bacteria evolved to overcome their defenses. Commander watched the situation reports with growing alarm from the orbital command ship. Casualty rates among ground forces had jumped from negligible to catastrophic within 72 hours. Entire platoons were going silent, their last communications describing soldiers collapsing from unknown causes. Medical evacuation shuttles were bringing up troops whose bioarmor was literally dissolving. They tried sterilization protocols. They deployed energy weapons designed to kill biological contaminants, but Earth's bacterial load was so enormous that sterilizing any area larger than a city block was impossible. Worse, the bacteria seemed to be adapting to their sterilization techniques. Microorganisms that survived the energy treatments were passing resistance to other bacteria through horizontal gene transfer, creating new strains that were even more dangerous to physiology. Sarah coordinated the biological offensive from her underground laboratory like a general commanding invisible armies. She sent bacterial samples to resistant cells around the world, teaching them how to cultivate and deploy the most effective strains. What had started as a desperate experiment was becoming a coordinated biological war. In Moscow, Russian scientists still hiding in the subway system followed Sarah's protocols to turn the city's ancient sewer network into a weapon. They pumped concentrated bacterial cultures into the water supply of buildings occupied by forces. The aliens began evacuating their positions within hours as their soldiers fell ill. The breakthrough came when Dr. Wright made a discovery that changed everything. The bioarmor wasn't just vulnerable to Earth bacteria, it was actually a perfect breeding ground. The silicon-carbon hybrid material provided nutrients that Earth's microorganisms had never encountered before, and they reproduced exponentially when exposed to it. What had been designed as the ultimate defensive system became a liability that actively attracted and fed bacterial infections. Captain Torres flew her final mission over New York City, releasing a payload of modified influenza virus that Sarah had adapted for the alien physiology. The virus spread through forces like wildfire, jumping from soldier to soldier through their communication networks and shared equipment. Within 24 hours, the alien occupation force in Manhattan had been reduced from thousands to scattered dozens. The orbital fleet began picking up distress signals from their ground forces across the planet. The same pattern was repeating everywhere. Initial biological contamination, followed by rapid deterioration and system failure. Soldiers were dying not from weapons or explosions, but from microscopic invaders that their advanced technology couldn't even detect until it was too late. Commander ordered emergency sterilization of all returning shuttles, but the contamination had already reached the orbital ships. Maintenance crews who handled equipment from the surface began showing symptoms. Life support systems designed for sterile crystalline environments couldn't filter out Earth's aggressive microorganisms. The bacteria were loose in the fleet itself. Sarah received reports from around the world that painted the same picture. They were in full retreat from any area where humans had deployed biological weapons. Their seemingly invincible army was being defeated by organisms too small to see, weapons that had existed on Earth since before the first humans walked upright. The irony wasn't lost on her. Humanity's greatest weakness, its constant battle against disease and infection, had become its ultimate strength. Every plague, every pandemic, every bacterial infection in human history had contributed to the development of Earth's incredible microbial diversity. What they saw as primitive biological contamination was actually the result of billions of years of evolutionary warfare. As the fifth day of the invasion began, it was clear that Earth's invisible defenders were winning a war that conventional weapons never could have fought. The end began with a transmission that no human was supposed to hear. Deep in the Colorado bunker, military intelligence intercepted a desperate message from the orbital command to their home dimension. The alien language had been partially decoded over the past week, enough for the computer translation systems to pick out key phrases: biological hazard, total contamination, and most importantly, immediate evacuation. Dr. Sarah listened to the translated fragments while watching real-time satellite feeds of positions around the globe. The once mighty invasion force was collapsing everywhere simultaneously. In Tokyo, alien garrison ships were lifting off and retreating to orbit, leaving behind equipment and supplies that their soldiers could no longer safely handle. In Berlin, troops were abandoning their positions so quickly that they were leaving wounded behind. The biological warfare campaign had exceeded every optimistic projection. What had started as a desperate gamble with bacteria and sewage had become a planetary immune response. Earth itself was rejecting the invaders at the cellular level, and there was nothing their advanced technology could do to stop it. Commander stood in the medical bay of his flagship, staring at readouts that made no sense according to everything the hegemony knew about conquest and warfare. His soldiers weren't being defeated by superior weapons or clever tactics. They were being consumed alive by microscopic entities that seemed to exist everywhere on this cursed planet. The bioarmor that had protected forces across 17 dimensions was dissolving like sugar in acid rain. The medical reports were unanimous and terrifying. Every piece of equipment brought up from the planetary surface was contaminated. The bacteria didn't just survive in the sterile environment of the ships, they thrived. Worse, they were evolving in real time, developing new capabilities faster than science could study them. Some strains had learned to break down the crystalline components of their technology. Others were producing acids that ate through ship hulls. Dr. Wright emerged from the basement of Imperial College for the first time since the invasion began, stepping into the London sunlight to find the city eerily quiet. The occupation forces had withdrawn so quickly that they had left behind intact equipment and half-finished construction projects. She watched a group of alien shuttles ascending toward orbit, their hulls visibly corroded and streaming unknown fluids. The bacterial cultures in her lab had provided some of the most effective weapons in humanity's invisible arsenal. She had learned to breed aggressive strains of flesh-eating bacteria that consumed bioarmor in minutes. But looking at the abandoned alien equipment scattered around the college courtyard, she realized the victory was more complete than anyone had dared hope. General received confirmation from military units around the world. They were in full retreat, abandoning positions that had been considered permanently occupied just days earlier. In some cases, entire alien battalions had simply vanished, leaving behind only corroded equipment and mysterious organic residue that analysis teams were afraid to approach without full protection. The orbital battle, if it could be called that, was entirely one-sided. The fleet wasn't fighting, it was fleeing. Ships were breaking orbit as fast as their engines could carry them, and several vessels had been abandoned entirely when their crews could no longer safely operate them. The bacterial contamination had spread throughout the invasion fleet, turning their own ships into breeding grounds for Earth's microscopic defenders. Sarah watched the satellite feeds from her underground laboratory, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. The crystalline ships that had seemed so beautiful and terrifying a week ago were now visibly damaged, their surfaces pitted and by bacterial action. Some were venting atmosphere and fluids into space as their hulls failed. The technology that had seemed so far beyond human understanding was being reduced to scrap by organisms that didn't even have brains. The final confirmation came from radio telescopes around the world, all picking up the same transmission. They were broadcasting a warning to their home dimension on all frequencies, their message clear enough that human translators could understand the essential meaning. Dimension 18 is a biological death trap. Dominant species has weaponized their entire planetary ecosystem. Recommend permanent quarantine status. We are initiating full retreat. Captain Torres, the crop duster pilot who had flown humanity's first biological warfare missions, watched from the cockpit of her plane as the last ships disappeared through the dimensional rift above New York City. The massive tear in reality that had brought the invasion force to Earth was closing, the edges pulling together like a healing wound. Within minutes, there was nothing left but empty sky and the smell of victory carried on the wind. The aftermath was unlike anything in human history. Cities around the world were left with abandoned alien technology that no one dared to touch without extensive biological protection. They had fled so quickly that they had left behind weapons, vehicles, and equipment that would advance human science by centuries, if it could ever be safely studied. Dr. Wright led the first scientific teams to examine the abandoned alien positions in London. What they found was both fascinating and horrifying. The bioarmor hadn't just been defeated by Earth's bacteria, it had been completely consumed. In many cases, there were only empty suits of crystalline armor filled with bacterial colonies that had grown into complex ecosystems in a matter of days. The most remarkable discovery was that Earth's microorganisms had essentially learned to eat alien technology. Bacteria that had never encountered silicon-carbon hybrid materials had evolved the ability to break them down and use them as food sources. Some strains had developed the ability to process the exotic materials in weapons, turning instruments of war into bacterial nurseries. Sarah stood in the ruins of downtown Chicago, where the first biological weapon test had taken place. The garrison that had occupied the tower was gone, but the building itself was still standing. The aliens had fled so quickly that they hadn't had time to destroy anything. Scattered around the plaza were pieces of equipment that gleamed like jewelry but were too dangerous to approach without full protective gear. The dimensional rift above Earth's major cities collapsed completely within 72 hours of the retreat order. They had sealed the pathway between dimensions, cutting off any possibility of return or reinforcement. Humanity was alone again, but now they possessed something that no species in 17 conquered dimensions had ever achieved. They had made the hegemony afraid. The weeks that followed, scientists around the world worked to understand what had really happened. They had been defeated not by human intelligence or courage or advanced technology, but by the simple fact that Earth was alive in a way their sterile crystalline worlds could never be. Every breath of air on Earth contained thousands of microorganisms that had been evolving and adapting for billions of years. Every surface was covered with bacterial films. Every drop of water teemed with invisible life. The aliens had conquered 17 dimensions, but they had never encountered a world where life itself was a weapon. Earth's bacterial ecosystem wasn't just diverse, it was aggressively adaptive, constantly evolving new capabilities to survive in hostile environments. When exposed to technology and biology, it had done what it always did: adapted, evolved, and thrived. The final report on the invasion concluded with a statement that would have seemed like science fiction just weeks earlier. Earth had been saved not by its weapons or its warriors, but by its microbes. The same bacteria and viruses that caused disease and death in humans had proven to be the ultimate defenders of their planet. In trying to conquer Earth, they had made the mistake of entering a biological arms race that had been running for billions of years. And somewhere in the space between dimensions, the hegemony marked Earth's coordinates with a warning that would last forever. Biological hazard. Species has achieved symbiosis with planetary pathogens. Conquest impossible. Avoid at all costs. Humanity had won its place among the stars not through conquest, but through the simple fact that they had learned to live with chaos itself.